And if you told me a couple of years ago that we'd have a major presidential candidate talking at a crypto conference, I don't think anyone would have believed it. So please welcome to the stage Republican candidate for president of the United States, Vivek Ramasawmy.
See you first, please. How you been?
I'm good. Good day one. You know, this is my 8th or 9th moderated session today.
Is that right?
And I'm getting a little tired. How do you keep the stamina on the campaign trail? It's like
it's interesting. I think the first break that I took was the 2 days before the first debate.
Yeah.
I think I got my second break coming up in early next week as well. The truth is, I would say two things. One is the first few weeks were draining, and I realized what it was is we decided that like my family was going to be doing their thing, I'm going to be traveling. That didn't work. This is all consuming. And so when we've tried to do it more as a family, that's actually been very energizing for me. It's like we take the little bubble that we have at home and we just travel with that.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing is when you're guided by your own sense of purpose, it's one thing if you're slaving away at something that feels like work that you have been tasked to do. You could not do something like what I'm doing now. You would have quit long ago. But I think if you're guided by your actual sense of purpose that guided you into it in the first place, and I think that every day we get closer, it looks like we have a very clear path to succeeding here. That keeps me going, and what was normally 7 hours of sleep is down to 4, but I seem to be doing just the same. And so we're excited and in for the fight. And I think we're on track to being successful.
I think one of the things when we talk about this broader conversation, I don't expect that you're going to be versed in every single line of the crypto bills that have come out the last couple of months. And I know we've been speaking with your team and you've been thoughtful about developing this platform. But that's almost secondary to me versus how you think in terms of a framework for policy, because I think there's a lot of folks in this room that feel like we've been burned in the past by folks that say the right things, but ultimately certain elements that are important to the crypto community are fundamentally at odds with their worldview or their politics, right?
Yeah.
And so you've been outspoken about the administrative state. You even tweeted something after the grayscale ruling where the SEC lost in court. It seems like that is kind of the intersection for you and kind of where your platform is developing to talk about overreach generally, and then how you would apply that to financial assets, financial services. I think it's something we haven't really heard you speak too much about, but I'm curious if we take it 30,000 feet, your view on how to reform the administrative state, and then we can talk financial services and then kind of go into crypto and build.
Sure. And I think it's important people understand a bit about my background, which is a little bit different than a traditional politician coming at this, where the way it works, you get a briefing, takes 3-page documents, you learn the key bullets, and then you spout back off what sounded good from what you learned. The truth is, I have worked in regulated industries. I actually started my career in a hedge fund, so financial regulation, interfacing with understanding the regulation by enforcement paradigm of the SEC, the penchant to fail to define rules until after the fact. This existed long before crypto, and this is going to exist long after we solve the problems in the crypto space as well. I started a biotech company that developed 5 medicines that are FDA approved today. I have been through the cumbersome process of dealing with the FDA that has the same paradigm, regulation by enforcement. And so I arrive at my views. I think they're relatively strong views on what the future of governmental interface with crypto should be, not through having been a crypto entrepreneur or a trader, but through actually a path to being an entrepreneur in other industries that face the same issues that you all do. And that's what gives me my passion for shutting down the unconstitutional 4th branch of government. That is the cancer at the heart of our federal government today, is the people who we elect to run the government. They're not the ones who actually run the government. Most of the political power is wielded by people who were never elected to their positions, that sit in the back of 3-letter government agency buildings in Washington, D.C. in a 3-letter regulatory alphabet soup. From the FTC to the SEC to the FDA to the God knows what. That is where political power is exercised in the United States today. This is not a Democrat idea or a Republican idea. But my dream as a citizen is the same dream that our founding fathers had, that the people who we elect to run the government, at the very least, ought to be the ones who actually run the government. And so if a majority of people in this country wanted to elect a Congress that said, we don't want any of this cryptocurrency stuff, get it out. We don't like Bitcoin, we don't like crypto, we don't like all that weird stuff, we don't want it, ban it, get it out of the United States of America. I wouldn't vote that way, that wouldn't be my vote, but I would agree to continue living in a country where a majority of people elected representatives to Congress, the Senate, the US president, that signed that into law. Hey, that wouldn't happen because the beauty of our country is we have a free marketplace of ideas. That's how it works. The best ideas win when you can actually debate them. But that doesn't work when the people who actually make the laws are people who have no backstop of democratic accountability. And so actually it is the thing I talk about most at the campaign trail. Our top domestic policy objective is to lay off 75% of the federal employee headcount, send them packing, send them home, keep the 25% who actually do what they were supposed to do in the first place. Shut down redundant agencies that should not exist, and rescind what will be a majority of federal regulations that fail the Supreme Court's test in a case called West Virginia versus EPA, which says that if Congress did not give the power to a regulator, then that regulator does not have the power to issue regulations. If we do that, we unlock innovation in this country, we unlock economic growth in this country, and I think most importantly, we revive our national identity where we have 3 branches of government, not 4. And I think that's what we're going to succeed in doing.
You talk about it a lot. It's definitely controversial, and it's had quite a bit of skepticism. And I know you've explained how you would restructure or totally disband a few different agencies. The one bit of pushback that everybody universally comes back with is you can't just do this with a strike of the pen from the office of the presidency. There is a certain amount of deference that the courts will give to regulators that aren't control. And so you do this, but you'll get out that Donald Trump is really. So what getting too deep about the specific, 1970, 1980s kind of court case that you explained here, without getting too deep into the legal weeds, how is this going to be different, and how would you pick the targets, beyond the ones that you've mentioned outside of financial services? Would there be financial services elements here as well?
Sure. So, without getting into the legal weeds, because that's the speech I gave last Wednesday that lays out the legal authority for why the U.S. president has the power to, who would have ever thought, run the executive branch of government. Now, I think it takes a unique combination to get this done. Trump at least got the closest in terms of exposing the administrative state as a problem. It takes a CEO coming in from the outside. An existing DC politician or political creature is not going to get that job done. A CEO knows that if somebody works for you and you can't fire them, that means they don't work for you. It means you work for them because you're responsible for what they do without any authority to change. So it does take that outsider, but it takes an outsider with a bone deep understanding of the laws and the Constitution in this country. So I'll give you one example to give you a sense of what that legal understanding is. The advisors told Trump he couldn't fire people in the administrative state, the bad actors in the deep state, because there are these so-called civil service protections, rules that say you can't fire federal employees, because the point is, let's say you work at the SEC and I don't like your views on abortion. The logic is if I'm a political figure, the president, I shouldn't be able to fire you, a technocrat, from your job. Agree or disagree, that's what the civil service rules say. But read the law. It does not apply to mass layoffs, large reductions in force. The logic never applied to that. There's a separate set of rules governing large reductions in force. Mass layoffs are absolutely what I am bringing to the DC bureaucracy. Now that takes the president who understands those rules but comes in as an outsider. And I think that one of the things I've learned from my short time in politics is that those two qualities don't usually go together. You have people like Trump with sharp elbows willing to break glass, but they don't know the first thing about what the law actually is. They rely on the advisor class to tell them. And that's a problem when the advisor class is a product of the very swamp you're going in to drain. Then you've got legal academics, the kind of people who, former law professors and others line. We're working on our team, laying out the policy basis for action. Really have an executive or entrepreneurial skill set to see something through with the brute force that's going to be required. And so I do think that's a unique combination that's going to be required. It's part of what calls me into this race. I don't believe that I can make promises of what Congress won't do. Those are the false promises that presidential candidates make. Repeal and replace Obamacare. That was the top campaign promise of 2016. Trump did a lot of good for this country, but that wasn't one of them. And so nothing I'm promising on this campaign will be contingent on Congress. Everything I'm focused on doing, I can do as the chief executive of the executive branch of government. There is one executive branch, not 100. There are 3 branches of government, not 4. And it turns out the laws and the Constitution of this country work in exactly the way that it's supposed to, that the duly elected president gets to set that policy. And when I'm going to fire 75% of the employees in most administrative agencies, including the SEC, I think that that is something that will liberate both our national character as well as liberating our economy and liberating innovation in this country, which has been hampered by that wet blanket of regulations coming from those 3-letter agencies.
I haven't heard you talk specifically about the SEC yet, or any financial regulator. You've talked about the FBI, you've talked about the Department of Energy, the Department of Education. And so I think what you just said is SEC's in that list now too. But
Not to shut down the SEC. I mean, we've identified specific agencies we will shut down.
Yep.
But if we're going to have a 75% headcount reduction across the entire federal bureaucracy, that means most agencies will see a 75% or at least majority headcount reduction within that agency too. And it's my experience in the private sector, I think the government's no different. That 25% of the employees get 80% of the useful work done. The problem with agencies like the U.S. Federal Reserve or the SEC is when you have a bunch of people showing up to work who should have never had that job in the first place. The problem isn't just their headcount cost. That's the least of it. It's that they find things to do that they shouldn't have been doing in the first place. And it's one thing, that might be a special project on the side at a company. At the level of the government, that's issuing new regulations that the regulator actually never had the power to issue in the first place. And one of my chief issues with agencies like the FDA and the SEC is this regulation via enforcement paradigm, where they refuse to pre-specify what the rules actually are, but demonstrate what the rules are by picking who the bad apples are after the fact. And it's funny, even in the regime that pre-existed before crypto, dates back to the 2000s, when there were calls in Congress to define, let's say, certain securities law violations like insider trading, would define what it is and what it isn't, put it into law. The chief opponent of that was none other than the SEC. You see the same thing with the FDA. You want to put into the law, do you require 2 clinical trials or 1? Be clear. The chief opponent is the FDA. And so ambiguity is the friend of the tyrant. Doesn't matter what country or what society you live in, ambiguity is the friend of the person who actually wants to exercise undue power. But in this country, we're a nation of laws, not of men. And so whatever the regulations are, it may or may not be the regulatory regime I favor. I favor generally less is more, believing in decentralized innovation and empowerment in this country. But if the majority of people in this country disagree with me, I will still agree to live in this country. But it better darn well be done through the front door rather than through the back door, which is, I think, the main problem today with the grayscale ETF. Thankfully, we have a judicial system country, legal standard for regulation, still does the job. But you straighten the list. You cannot say whether Ethereum is or not. Against that backdrop, Gensler 2.0 tomorrow is a bank with a security, is a security, the issuer of which is a government. You have an agency that is sufficiently purposefully broad in the scope of fields. That is not a constitutional republic. That is a technocracy, a autocratic technocracy. That is a fundamental bastardization of what was built out in the first place. And so this is just one domain that we're talking about this agency because that interfaces with you all, but from the EPA to the FDA to countless other agencies, this is the story of the administrative state. And the good news is this is something that a US president can fix without asking Congress for permission or for forgiveness.
I think Chair Gensler and the SEC went after stoner cats, so everything that you just mentioned is probably also considered a security. If stoner cats is security. But one thing I found interesting, interacting with you and your team, you're just developing a crypto platform, right? And I think you've been pretty transparent to get the some of the details right here. So we
expect to put that out by before I forget this, I want to say by Thanksgiving, we're going to put out a comprehensive crypto policy framework. We're at 75% of the way there. One of the reasons I wanted to be here in a couple of other forums like this,
I can confirm it's 75%.
Probably
a little bit more than me, but yeah.
Well, we want to get feedback before this is finalized. I don't want to listen to everything everyone says, but we want thoughtful people to actually have input to make sure that what we're putting out is real. Crypto@vivek2024.com is the email that we're inviting. We don't want, hey, this happened to me and this is my story and my pitch deck, but serious, thoughtful proposals for what other presidential candidates or politicians or existing regulators are missing. We're very open-minded. This is how we, like to develop our policies in as thoughtful a way of people who are closest to the areas where we're proposing that policy and we want to hear from. And so we'll continue to invite that between now and November and be rolling this out between now and Thanksgiving.
Well, a major presidential candidate actually having a fully baked position on crypto, I think is something I hope people will take up Vivek and his campaign on actually submitting some feedback here. I want to talk a little bit about the three bills that got out of committee in the House. And obviously, Senator Gillibrand is going to be here on Friday. She's a co-sponsor with Senator Lummis on another proposal out of the Senate. But the ones in the House are, actually fairly straightforward. So you've got the stablecoin bill, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, right? You've got the FIT Act, which basically covers the exchanges like for like versus federal or national exchanges like the New York Stock Exchange. Those seem fairly intuitive to be able to get right. Like you'd expect adults to be able to get together in a functioning regulator and get some of those details right, and a functioning Congress to get some of those details right. The third one I think is often overlooked though, and it is called the Keep Your Coins Act. And essentially, it's the right to self-custody unencumbered. And this seems to jive pretty well with a lot of the positions that you have, which are more libertarian. But it strikes me that as silly that we even need to affirm certain constitutional protections for the ability to kind of own your own property. But would you affirm that through executive orders?
Executive affirmation is what I look at, because that presumes that you have to actually enforce something that's already in the law. Yeah. So I want to be careful about using executive orders as the way that we get things done, because they can get reversed. But an affirmation that this is actually going to be the way the regulators reporting into the executive branch look at the law. So I think the Keep Your Keys Act, I think this is relatively non-controversial. I would think in terms of,
well, it didn't get any votes from one side.
Well, it's interesting how that works, but I view it as non-controversial. I think that there's a deeper issue here relating to the third-party doctrine. I don't know if that's something you're familiar with or not, but it was I think a shameful part of our national history relating to bank regulations, which basically say that you give up your right to privacy if you do business with a bank. It actually went so far as to say, even if you're making a phone call using a landline or a cell phone from one person to another, you give up your presumed right to privacy based on your contract with the company, because the telephone company or the cell phone company is a third party. So if you shared that information with a third party, you actually presumptively gave up your right to privacy. This was the basis for the NSA abuses, by the way, that Snowden exposed, the systematic spying that was going on in American people's phone conversations. The legal basis for it was the third-party doctrine that if you're choosing to have a phone call rather than a private conversation, you're disclosing that to the third party that is the phone provider. So I think that same logic finds its way and rears its ugly head here relating to bank regulations as well. So part of what I want to revisit, we can go into any specific piece of legislation, and my cautionary notes would be careful what you wish for in concentrating too much power in the federal government or in the U.S. Federal Reserve, which has proven itself hostile to competing currency systems. versus the dual system that we have, which actually mostly decentralizes a lot of this to the states. So all I would say is that some of those bills, be careful what you wish for in centralizing too much in the federal government. But I think the deeper issue that I'm focused on as well is getting rid of that third-party doctrine itself, going back to the Bank Secrecy Act and otherwise, because I think that's the real threat to liberty. That doesn't just affect crypto, although it does affect you all, but it actually affects our broader freedoms and the infringements on our freedoms from the federal government in the first place.
I have one last question. It's a little bit more personal, but maybe some other entrepreneurs in the room are thinking along the same lines. If you're getting into politics and it's not razor focused on a single issue, do you have to choose private sector or public sector? Because you made a hard choice to basically step aside from your biotech company based on some of the controversies that were the result of the 2020 environment that we were in. And maybe I could argue things maybe have cooled down a little bit, and there's been a little bit more pushback to that side of the culture. But
so I'd say a couple of things.
Should people speak up? Maybe is the other way to put it. Or do you have to fix your spots?
It's a good question. So I'll give you the background that I laid out in my first book, Woke Inc. I voluntarily stepped down as CEO of a biotech company that I founded. It was a multi-billion-dollar company, built it from scratch after the George Floyd protests, where there was effectively a demand that every CEO in this country make a statement or donation of some kind on behalf of the Black Lives Matter movement. Putting the content of the BLM movement to one side, it was my view that this wasn't the job of biotech CEO. And I refused to take sides on an issue where I know that many of my employees and many of the people who deal with our company have diverse views as existed in the country, and I had my own. That raised a series of controversies that forced me to have to make a choice the following January. Of I could continue to speak my mind on my criticism of stakeholder capitalism, but it was going to have a negative impact on my company. Or I could say what you're supposed to say, chapter and verse for the rosy future of ESG-infused stakeholder capitalism, and leave my company unharmed. But I couldn't have both at the same time. And so I made the choice to say I'm stepping down in my capacity as a CEO to speak my mind freely as a citizen. Now, I do think the environment's changed a little bit, but I personally think I like to practice what I preach and recommend others practice the same, which is that in your capacity as a CEO or an entrepreneur, my suggestion is focus on your mission. Whatever your mission is, maybe it's to provide medicines to patients who need them. Maybe it's to provide a new platform for trading cryptocurrencies. Whatever that is, your organization has a mission. And you should want to ask yourself, what kinds of diversity do you want to advance that mission? And then what kinds of diversity don't you want to advance that mission? You may not want diverse commitments to your mission or diverse commitments to work hard towards that mission. There you want uniformity, but maybe diversity of skill sets to help you achieve that. So ask yourself, what allows you to achieve your mission wearing your hat as an entrepreneur? And then I think you separately, as human beings, wear a separate hat as a citizen. Right? Just because you're a capitalist doesn't mean you cease to be a citizen, but just be clear about which hat you're wearing when you speak the way you do. And so I personally do have a fundamental still criticism for those who might, whether they agree with me or not, try to have it both ways, where, I'm going to speak in my capacity as a CEO, but use my status as a CEO to foist my political views unrelated to my business onto everybody else to do it, from climate change to racial justice to anything else. I think it's a violation of the social contract to say that you get special protections and limited liability as a business to pursue your mission. And you should be unconstrained in pursuing that mission and unapologetic about it. But separately from that, if you in your capacity as a citizen, employee to CEO, janitor to executive, it doesn't matter. You're co-equal as citizens. And my view as a CEO matters no less than the analyst who joined us at the age of 22 on whether or not we should, pass a piece of gun control legislation. Our views are equal, regardless of where we sit in that biotech. And so that'd be my answer, is that we're all capitalists in our own capacity, pursuing our own self-interest. Great. In that capacity, wear that hat, do it. Don't apologize for your success and pursue your mission to the fullest extent possible. But there's a side of us that's also a citizen in a constitutional republic. That's what casts the ballot, vote at the ballot box every November, where every citizen's voice and vote counts equally, regardless of the number of green pieces of paper in your bank account, regardless of your title in a corporate hierarchy. And as long as we're able to keep those things straight, then I would say, yes, you can have both ways, as long as you're wearing the right hat at the right time when you're actually engaging. So that's my perspective on it. Try to stay consistent. And, look, if we're wrapping up, I think
a great and nuanced answer.
Yeah,
and for the record, I think we've been fortunate to have you. We have a couple of tremendous leaders on the other side of the aisle. They're going to be here on Friday. And Masari's policy is pro-crypto and thoughtful leaders that are at least going to be thoughtful about enacting crypto policy. So it's a pleasure to have you. But yes, we're going to wrap up here. I think
I'm going to wrap up with the thought to say, you actually hit exactly the theme I was going to raise, which is that I don't think the real divide in this country is between Republican and Democrat, or between black or white. I think it is between the managerial class and the everyday citizen. And I think that's the real divide that has landed on your all's doorstep. In my capacity, hopefully as your next president, I'm going to also ask you, though, to put your frustrations into context. I get it. I share your frustrations. But where I see us as a country right now is that I don't think we have to be in this national decline that we accept that we're in. I think as a country, we're really, I hope, a little young, actually. Going through our own version of adolescence. Figuring out who we're going to be when we grow up. And when you see it that way, it gives you a little bit more latitude to be patient, to say, you know what, everything your industry is going through, everything that many other regulated industries are going through, everything our national identity crisis as a country, it's natural if you view ourselves as a nation that's still evolving towards our adulthood. And so, to end on, if I may, an optimistic note, I don't think we have to be that nation in decline. Reject the bipartisan consensus that we're in decline and maybe embrace a different view that we can still be in our ascent as a country. And hopefully that's still the country where no matter who you are or where your parents came from or what your skin color is, that you get ahead of the United States of America with your own hard work, your own commitment, your own dedication, and that you're free to speak your mind at every step of the way. That's the American dream. You all are living it. Keep doing what you're doing. And if you all do your part, I promise you all do mine, and making sure the government isn't in your way as you try to do your jobs too. So thank you for having me.
I think that's exactly how I would wrap up. As long as we're able to build, and as long as people are able to innovate and do what I think most people in this room are most excited about doing, which is not talk about policy. And hopefully next year we won't have you on stage because it's or any other politician. But Vivek, it was a pleasure, and really appreciate you sharing your thoughts with us today.
Thank you.
All right. That was great. That's great. All right.
So as we saw, that was Vivek talking about his future of the economy, where he sees tech being, and how he thinks that he can bring a solution to that. So we will see. He did post out an email address, so if you have a view on how policy should be on blockchain, it's crypto@vivek.ramasawmy.com. It's earlier in the message around the 2-minute mark, so look for that, and hope that you have a great time here at Mainnet, following us along, and we will see you on the flip side.